Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Get Out of Rap. A very special one for me personally, because it just feels like something I used to do for a good few years, just chewing the fat with two amazing human beings. Because I'm very lucky, and you're very lucky, that we are joined by Helen Beaumont Manahan and Pete Dunn from the wonderful BPA Quality. Hello.
Hello.
Oi, oi.
Now then, we've got to try and stick on topic, but I'm
Okay.
sure, like usual, our tangents will be very helpful.
Challenge accepted.
Keep it to an hour, right?
Yeah, we've got our own, we've still got a WhatsApp group, which we won't go into the name of or any other details, but that is a place where there's a lot of randomness. But we're going to stay on topic. And it's a topic I maybe, like a lot of people, don't much about, and that feels like a concern, but we're going to talk about consumer duty. So perhaps to start with, and I'm coming at this blind, I like to say that that's a tactic to help with a podcast, but that kind of masks the fact that I should know it, but I don't. But I'm sure I'm like a lot of people. Let's start with then, what is consumer duty and why is it a thing?
I love it. Well, it is a thing. It will be
It's
more
a
of a
thing.
thing after the 31st of July this year. It's a piece of legislation, I believe I'm using the right terminology there, from the FCA, Financial Conduct Authority here in the UK. And it aims to set higher expectations, really, for the standard of care that organisations, firms are giving their customers. They're having to act or take real action now to provide good outcomes, whatever that means, for their customers by way of a new kind of principle and then some rules that sit underneath that. So at its core, there's this kind of overarching principle called the consumer principle, or as it's very kind of snappily or snazzily entitled PRIN 12, as it's a kind of now sits within the principles for businesses for the FCA. And basically, from my understanding, where it applies, it supersedes the well-known and well-loved TCF. So Principle 6, fairness of, kind of process, that kind of guidance piece. And then now we have this duty piece, which is focused on outcomes. So do you want to add anything in with that, Pete?
I think that's it. That's a lot more than I had already, actually. So I would say, from my perspective of for insurance companies, for FCA regulated companies, it's very much around being more proactive about how you help your customers. You can't have unnecessary admin fees. You can't have what they call rip-off charges. You have to make it easier to switch, cancel, or be more proactive around how you support all of your customers, not just customer types or customer segments, but almost to that individual level. What's that individual customer's needs? And are they getting the best value from the products and services that your company offers them? Initially, it's going to be about live, current, products and services, but eventually it's going to expand further and it's going to cover previously sold, no longer live, but still managed services. So you've got some like long-term insurance that isn't sold anymore by a financial services company, some long-term investments and such. Then eventually they will also have to make sure that those kind of products and services are also meeting the same kind of rigor and fit for purpose outcomes as is expected in a consumer duty. So from the perspective of the customer, I think it's very much a significant raising bar in terms of what companies have to do to show that they are doing the best for their customers. It's no longer kind of, okay, I think to go, well, we've got some processes and we've got some policies. You're going to have to be a lot more involved and a lot more challenging internally on, well, actually, what does that mean for your customer, as opposed to just the classic customer at the heart of everything, and then wrap that up in a pretty bow, stick it up on a shelf and leave it alone and ignore it. Customer's got to be in the room and the customer's got to be represented. Customer's got to get the best value from organizations who are going to have to meet this consumer duty standard. So I guess that, there you go. There's an add-on from me.
Yeah, and I guess you've just answered them. Why is it a thing? And you said beautifully, didn't you? It's not enough anymore to just say, oh, we put our customers at the heart of everything we do. Because going forward, you can definitely expect for that to be swiftly followed with prove it then. under the duty. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that 31st of July, that's a key. It becomes live then, does it, at that point?
Yes, so that's when the duty comes into effect, and by which point firms are, I believe, expected to have their kind of plans that they would have been, putting into practice over the last year in place and ready to press go.
And you said there, Pete, I think as well, you said a significant raising of the bar from the provision that companies give customers. I always wonder about regulations that they're born out of something, that they're to address something. Do you have any thoughts around what this has been born from then? What you're nodding, Helen. What?
Yeah, so I think it's been born from the idea that with the duty, because it's outcomes focused, now it basically provides that FCA with a clearer kind of route to enforcement for infringements of it, because it's duty rather than the guidance of treating your customers fairly. Now we have some measurable outcomes that you're going to have to evidence, and it will hopefully, well, I'd say hopefully, it will be easier to kind of enforce those rules.
Do you think it was like, is this the evolution? Because TCF's been around for a long time, really, hasn't it?
I'm very young, Martin, so I don't know.
Exactly right, mate. It's been around for a very long time, but it was always that bit of a hangover almost from the FSA, moving to the FCA, and kind of there's always a bit about is that those guidelines clear enough? Can we absolutely hang our hat on something like that? When a lot of companies' pushback was always, well, we're providing you with this is what we think we need to do as a response, and the comeback at times was, yeah, that looks good. Okay, are we going to get fined on that? Or we can't, we couldn't get that level of surety. I think in turn the FCA's kind of understanding, especially over the last few years, of how widespread vulnerability and are kind of ever increasing in this perma-crisis place we live in is that most everyone's got some form of vulnerability or pressure, bringing out new and expanded principles that built on and expanded on and made it a lot more clear around those, that TCF start point was necessary to kind of really start helping people understand, well, when we look at it from a risk and controls perspective, from an audit perspective, all the way through to operational day in, day out activity, having clarity on what needs to happen. And I think one of the key positives here is almost the need up at the exec level to have someone who is responsible and accountable, someone who is appointed to a role that is, ultimately, as they're the face, the voice of the business when it comes to, being answerable and accountable to the new standards that are being set.
Yeah, so on that point, then, that part of it is having to choose. Firms are going to have to choose a consumer champion, and I'm sure that they've done that now. Someone who's kind of going to own, be responsible for, accountable for, ultimately the regulatory requirements that within the firm. Ideally, somebody non-executive director on the board, and then what they want to be doing is regularly having dialogue with people across the organisation to make sure that customers are being prioritised and they can evidence it if they're ever needed to. Something you said was interesting there, Pete, around the idea of almost like crystallising kind of guidance into duty, and we're kind of seeing that with the vulnerability piece. So we do a lot of training around vulnerability, particularly with financial services organisations, and what we see is that the guidance that the FCA gave a few years ago around fair treatment of vulnerable customers is kind of, as I mentioned, kind of now crystallising into duty. So it's not new, and personally, I think it's a great thing. I think it's a really good step forward, but it does probably represent a bit of a step change for a lot of organisations to deliver.
What I'm hearing from you both then is, and please jump in if my summary is incorrect, but is the FCA they're reducing the ability to interpretate your own or their guidance, so they're becoming a bit more prescriptive around these are the things that you should do. Is that right or wrong?
Yeah, yes, and I think for me, I would say not prescriptive per se, but certainly in terms of the level of clarity they're building around what they would expect to see in terms of live products and closed products, in terms of the type of information that how seeing clear and robust methods of focusing on your customers and all the kind of different diverse needs that those customers have, and having appropriate, training, support, development, reinforcement from auditing, benchmarking, and so on. Having all of those kind of checks and balances in place that, let's say, I don't think it's too prescriptive. I think there's more clarity and more guidance from them than there's ever been before to really build on what's come before from TCF. And I certainly think whilst the FCA has gone first, we're also going to see similar, outside of that as well, because we've seen that before with TCF. We saw know your customer, sales licensing conditions in the utility space as well. And again, I think this is just a natural progression, a positive progression where lived experience of companies, of consumers, of regulators over the last few years has led us to a place where I think this is a positive step for those three groups, because there's a lot more clarity, as they're saying. It's without being too prescriptive.
Yeah, and yeah, it's not like the curtains are going to drop, is it, on the 31st of July? And when we all ride off into the sunset, it's kind of where we start really. And just hearing you talk there, Pete, it sounds great for consumers if we're able to do this well, isn't it? And so we want to be evolving, embedding these principles of the duty in the culture, which sounds so high level and nonsensical, but we know what that means, don't we? You can't manufacture culture. It starts with, every person in that organization feeling that belonging and feeling like they understand that purpose. So I'm not just, kind of like chucking words around here. And then, kind of just iterating on that and thinking about how we're monitoring what we're doing, how we're complying, and making sure that everybody understands what this means, really. So
it's a fascinating time to be in our industry. I just thought,
what a time to be alive.
Yeah, exactly. Woohoo! To just think about the timing of this. You mentioned that, kind of we're still in this post-pandemic world, hybrid world. You mentioned there you're doing loads of training on vulnerable, how to specifically provide your service and look after vulnerable customers. In amongst all of this, and we know we're asking our front-facing team members to deal with more complex stuff and to integrate with ever-evolving technology. Within this context and within that environment, then it feels like there's this other key progression from the FCA. And like you said, it feels like, if it's like a lot of times in the past, this will be the vanguard of other changes. Are you hearing from people that you're talking to and I imagine, existing clients already, that there was some, not nervousness, but kind of apprehension maybe around, we want to do the right thing because that's how we operate anyway. But now we definitely want to do the right thing because the ante's been upped from the FCA. Where do we even start? And you mentioned, Helen, the consumer champion. Was it consumer champion you said?
Yeah.
Have you had companies saying, hey, listen, how do we get ready? What do we need to do?
It's a pertinent question, and it's almost like we fed that to you prior. So obviously, I mean, we don't need to reinvent wheels here, do we? Like, it should basically be a kind of a consolidation of our existing processes, making sure that we've pulled everything together, not like a complete, from the ground up building of something. And that's why I would say QA is really critical now. And whereas potentially, and this, Martin, as well as Pete and I do, that often it's been a bit of a wading through custard kind of struggle to get our voices heard, because people don't want to hear certain things about their business. But really now people are going to have to listen. I heard, as you could probably imagine, in the run up to this, we went on quite a few kind of, learnings and training seminars and things like that. And one of the experts said, QA is about to be given some teeth, and rightfully so. So at board level now, it's really important people are listening to us. No.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, picking up on that point you made there, MT, on further progression. Yeah, we've seen some great research from Steve at the Contact Label previously, haven't we? Where complexity of interactions has been increasing for a very long time now. We know from our own experiences with our clients and talking to people in the industry that, you know, especially pandemic and post-pandemic, that emotion has also climbed, you know, so the complexity is climbing, the interaction, you know, the tension within interactions is climbing. Now, I think it can go two ways, as always, with any legislation for this kind of size and scale. We go back to the business prevention police. You know, if you implement it as yet another set of tick boxes that add more to your frontline operations and your team leaders in terms of, you know, what are they quality checking, or your QA teams, you add more to your compliance teams and your auditors in a way that, you know what, here's just another big pile of stuff that you've got to remember and you've got to check, and then you're going to get a load of red flags about when you get audited. Or we could look at it in terms of, there's loads of tech out there, AI, for good or real. You know, that was one of the key conversations we had recently with a round table of industry kind of, you know, experts, senior leaders and such, talking about tech and AI and the consumer duty, and trying to understand, well, how do we find a way that really delivers on the requirements that the FCA are putting in front of us with more clarity than ever before, without just making it the burden of the operation of the contact center, because there's already plenty on that plate. And I think we're in a great position now with, you know, this time to be alive almost in this industry, in finding the best way forward with all the tech, the AI. What can we do to, you know, without removing that human focus and expertise to kind of get better outcomes for, you know, and it's not just for the, I'm back, I froze there. It's not just for customer, it's for the employee as well. And that in turn should drive better outcomes, you know, for the organization too. So working on getting it delivered the right way, I think, is the key. You know, that change management piece, getting it done the right way, so everyone understands the impact of everyone understands their place, you know, in terms of how to positively deliver it and support it. You support your front line with that kind of empowerment and autonomy to own that as well. And you will absolutely get yourself into a better position for, you know, for terms of opportunity of delivering success for those three parties again. Or, you know, say you build another scorecard, tick some more boxes, get told off by the auditor, and everyone hates it, you know?
Yeah. It's so true. And it's back to that idea of, you know, if we're going to kind of really embed this properly in terms of culture change and moving to a fully outcomes-based approach, then like you just said there, Pete, really, or at least I'm maybe putting words in your mouth, it is about making sure that right from the front line, they understand, you know, exactly how much they matter in the ecosystem, you know, what their nodes in that system and how important it is, and make sure that, you know, want to do the right thing by customers anyway. Of course, nobody goes to work to do a bad job, but it's about how do we make sure that they understand why that is crucially important. So I think, yeah, customer first, colleague first, to your point about where we are in the, you know, post-pandemic world. And, you know, you've used other couple of things. Did you say perma crisis? I love that. You know, everything going on, strong economic and political headwinds, you know, that we're kind of facing into at the moment.
Absolutely.
It's about making sure that we are taking care of ourselves and our people, and not being scared to lean in. It seems quite scary, the duty. When I first heard about it, I remember that kind of like shiver as a kind of QA evaluator, assessor, you know, kind of consultant trainer type deal. It felt a bit like, oh, this is big. But actually, it's about doing the right thing and evidencing it. And I don't want to plug BPA too much, but that's what we do. And we've been doing it, you know, ensuring good outcomes for customers, you know, doing the right thing. That's what we do. So it's not something to be scared of.
Well, it's reassuring in a way. Well, no, not in a way. It is reassuring to hear you both positive about this, because the other thing I was thinking when you're looking at the environment that this is coming into and will influence, the bit I missed out, I guess, which you've prompted me to think about, was we're at a time of decreasing customer satisfaction. So by any measure that's out there, by any a lot of surveys, customer satisfaction seems to be lower than ever. Do you think something like this, because it's so overtly outcome based, is going to see that trend start to go upwards with people adopting it and reinforcing it through the kind of granular expertise you can get from a good quality monitoring operation?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope there's an element of reverse engineering. So yes, good outcomes for customers are now going to be, kind of like mandated by the FCA under the duty. But really that, as we've always said with any kind of quality assurance or insight program, it depends on your customer base, your organization, and what your key goals are. So it's about thinking, what do the ideal outcomes kind of look like, or even bad outcomes, what do they look like, and then working backwards from there to kind of map all of that out. Don't know if I've quite answered your question there, but it felt relevant. Sorry, Martin.
No, I think you have, because you're talking about this is if a key concept is actually, rather than just saying we really think customer outcomes are important, now it's going to be, well, prove it. How do you prove that you really are working on customer outcomes? Then the devil's going to be in the detail, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are so many different kind of, canaries in the mine, aren't there, about whether your customers are receiving good outcomes. And these are the things that if we're alive to them, then we can, kind of report on back to the FCA. So, things like complaints are an easy win, tracking and trending over time, even first contact resolution, response times, all of these things, but also those kind of, to your point, that the hard kind of QA metrics, quality, as long as the scorecards are robust and are really capturing that we, what our rules and regulations are for us as an organization to show up for our customers. And that can really, help to demonstrate that we are prioritizing our customers and putting them first right throughout the journey. And there's something in what you were saying about maybe, giving some of your customers a call, doing some journey mapping, mystery shopping, the whole life cycle of that customer to make sure that the product is fair, fit for purpose, and all of that happy, good stuff, and compliant as well.
And you mentioned you got together with senior leaders, I guess, over and above just normal day-to-day stuff, but you got together with industry senior leaders. Was that specifically on this, or was it just this a topic that came up?
Bit of both, actually. So we've as kind of Helen mentioned there, right? In the process of getting closer to customers, we have to role model. We have to do that ourselves. So getting close to our customers, potential customers, or just network fundamentally. In talking to the senior leaders that we know across a number of different industries, we focus this one on some of the big challenges, right? Because there's plenty right now going on. There always is, but there just seems to be that little bit more, that we've got that ongoing, attraction and retention of staff. We've got trying to upskill them to manage more emotively driven interactions. We've got AI, right? It's everywhere. Is it going to kill contact centers? Is it going to save contact centers? Is it the next big thing? How many times have we heard that over the last however many decades, right? Here comes something that I think this is an opportunity to clarify for a whole host of companies that lots of disparate bits of effort really need to be crystallized into how do we do more with less? How do we get better CX? How do we use the technology that potentially we already have to better effect? And so we had that as a kind of a broad menu of discussion items for that group, which fundamentally boiled down to, and one of the most interesting things we took out of that actually, which boiled down to, was we were having some of these conversations 10 years ago, right? And if we look back over the last 5 or so years, if you look at the leaps that we've seen in industry, society, personal and professional lives, right? We're all working from home today. A decade ago, distinct chance we'd all be in the office, right? And that was part of the course. It wouldn't just be a day here, a day there. It wouldn't be balancing my personal and professional requirements would be like 9 to 5 in the office. It would be, let's put more people in front of this problem. So picking on the point that Helen mentioned, complaints are a great place to get some real gold nuggets of insight about what your customers are talking about. We know now that generally most customers will churn, almost half of customers will churn after one bad interaction with a brand, over 80% after 2 bad interactions. So this is the point where consumer duty, I think, offers the opportunity to kind of go, right, we have to respond to this. It's coming down the track. It is going to have an impact. All these other things are already having an impact. If you take them on separately, as separate challenges and problems, as opposed to, well, here's an opportunity for more significant change, the same as we had a few years back when suddenly we've got to get everyone home, we've got to get everyone a laptop, we've got to do it in a week. We managed that as an industry. It's amazing where people are given that clarity of purpose and that need and that deadline. And I think this is exactly the same situation. We can look at it as that. It's time to grasp the nettle almost and just use all of the stuff that we've got, the tech, the training, these clearer than ever principles and do something that's going to, really make a significant change, a positive change.
So again, that's coming across this kind of, actually, this is a positive, but what if you're listening to this and you don't feel ready?
It is a great question. It is a great question. I think looking back at TCF, KYC, GDPR, implementation, the millennium bug, all of these things that were outside of our control, outside of our influence to a good degree, we never fully feel ready because we don't have that control over it. When it is something as big as this, the best we can do in terms of preparedness, I think, is put dedicated time and effort internally as an organization into it. You get the right people, you free them of their day-to-day tasks. Then you also need to bring that external lens to bear as well. And, because much like feedback or change management, an external view sometimes will tell you exactly what you already know. But sometimes it finds those gaps, those opportunities to see the weaknesses that you yourself don't recognize and provide it in a way to do something about it. If you don't feel ready, pretty realistic. But guess what? It's a lot of people, right? There always is a lot of people not feeling ready for the latest big challenge. So it's all about sharing that best practice. It's all about getting external expertise to reinforce it. So it's problem shared is a problem halved. It's, and again, that's what happened around that round table that we did is people talked about the nuances of their responses. And we went from quite jaded, it's just more compliance through to, no, this is an opportunity to see it. And that's the reality of change within people, right? Is we all react to it in slightly different ways. So lots of people not feeling ready, but there's plenty of ways to get ready for it as well.
Yeah, that collaboration really, isn't it? And information sharing, it's going to be absolutely vital. And just hearing you speak there, Pete, I don't know if this is relevant or not. I think it's like a coaching adage, but the idea that the soup can't read the label on its can. Sometimes you might not be able to see something that, an external lens, could maybe give you some clarity on. So that, really mapping the kind of the key requirements of the duty, gathering all of your data, leveraging all your kind of information to hand and maybe getting those external views. And then again, things like mystery shopping, workshops, kind of deep dives, and then potentially training as well to fill any gaps as well. And then iterating on all of that, I'd say. And you've mentioned all the other things like the kind of, allocation of internal resources and thinking about your frameworks for assessment.
Now, I've still got my flag. I've got the flag that I will wave whenever I get the opportunity to, that's born out of working with you guys at BPA, the chance to wave the flag for QA, or go and get my double cassette of Now That's What I Call Quality, and play some of our favorite hits, because you mentioned earlier about this kind of giving QA teeth, or the visibility again about, hey, go and speak to your QA team, have a look at the framework that you currently have, because of all the different functions within the contact center, when you're talking about readiness for consumer duty or the kind of delivery of implementation or adherence to, there isn't another function that is going to play as big a role as QA, is there?
Apart from the frontline teams, I'd say, but they go hand in glove, of course. But yeah, I'd agree with that.
And should then, if that's the case, and it's good point about kind of the QA team working with frontline customer facing teams, but from the QA point of view, if you feel comfortable that you are in a good place before, are you still going to be in a good place after? You know what I mean?
And that's a great question. I think that boils down to perception of the truth. Because if you think you're in a good place before, chances are, yes, you probably will think you're in a good place after. Whether that bears truth is almost, the SDA turns up and you become the first company to suffer under the new kind of case law, and you get a large fine, and you're going to have those, those opinions, those worldviews shattered quite painfully. And that lends itself back to that point of sometimes you've just got to bring in someone else, something else, do something different, challenge your own thinking, or even if you do it internally, build a team that's purposely almost, go out there, be inquisitive, challenge everything, never settle on this is the way we've always done it. In fact, hone in on those kind of activities and almost challenge, well, what's the new way? What's the better way? How, if you're asked right now, to point that Helen made earlier, if the SA come in and go, all right, prove it's the best thing for the customer. If you can't do that, then it doesn't matter how good you think you are. You're not going to stand up to that acid test,
You should be able to generate those types of responses, though, if you have any kind of, I don't want to say any kind, but if you've got a QA function, it could be that it's just not being used correct. It's not being used in the most effective way to be able to give you that kind of reassurance, right?
It's making me think about, kind of specific areas like vulnerability, for example, and whether your QA team have been upskilled and empowered to maybe really tune in and listen out for those key signs. Or, I say your QA team, whether they're also maybe using, like tech solutions as well, but it's that marriage at that point of machine intelligence and human intelligence to make sure you're really picking up on the key elements of that. So taking that and run with it. But ultimately, I think you're right. You're missing a trick if you're not upskilling your QA function and you're just keeping them, to Pete's earlier point about just ticking boxes. That's not going to be enough anymore. We really have to make sure that people have that holistic approach and that everything we do is outcomes focused, really, in the QA space. I think that's the crux of it.
So outcomes focused QA, if you started there, is that like the Pareto? That's actually going to account for a lot of your reassurance that you are going to be on the right side of this when it's live.
That's an encouraging thought, isn't it?
I would love for it to be that simple, but yeah, in terms of the key first step, ensuring that exactly as Helen said there, that your scorecards have, pre-validated them, you check them, you've aligned them, you've built very clear, concise scoring standards, so everyone knows what good looks like and how to interpret it. That's great. But if you lack the autonomy and the skill set to be able to apply that proactively, if you lack the confidence potentially as well to kind of go, I've got this type of customer. I think what this does is almost expand the outcomes piece directly into operations. Classically, we always talk about QA as a tick box, it's yes, no. And we talked about it as a QI program, right? We're living in the gray, we're being subjective, and we calibrate consistently so that subjectivity is controlled and well understood so you can trust the outcomes. This, I think, then transplants that expectation even further into the operational reality, because there is a need. I don't think it's a nice to have anymore. It will be a need for empowered, autonomous specialists at the front line. We've talked about it for a while now, right? I think we talked about it 3 or 4 years ago on a previous Get Out of Rap, but now more than ever, there's absolutely a need to have empowered expertise at the front, especially because you can't just go and hire 10, 20, 30 more people if your call volumes are going up, because they're getting paid more money by other industries. So there's a shortage. You have to find better ways of doing it. And I think training aligned to a scorecard that talks about the right things, to give the right coaching ready feedback, and training that it can be surgically precise on, these are the areas you need to be better at because these are the outcomes that need to be attained. If you look at it that way, there's a clearer path than ever between QA, training, and the right outcomes for your customers that the FCA has helped facilitate with this expanded, information and the duty that they're putting in front of us.
Let's be honest as well. Like, we know our industry is so busy that there's so much going on from an operations team point of view. Whilst I'm sure that there's been projects in play for a long time, that people are still going to burst into the room on the 31st, flustered, just haven't got there, because it's one of 10, 20 plates that have been spun constantly. Is there going to be a period of, are there periods after the 31st, or is it has to be done by the 31st?
I would say my understanding from reading a lot of information the FCA has put out there, that the first kind of major brief came out in July last year, and that preparation time has been the last year to get your company, your organization into a place where you're ready for that go live. From that point, I think looking back, we can kind of expect that. I think a good thing from GDPR almost was the firms who, follow the spirit and the intent of, I think we might have a problem, we're going to report it, can you work with us? The FCA met them on halfway. Firms who, ignored it or proactively tried to circumvent it are getting fined. And I think it'll be very much the same way as the ICO approach that. I think we'll see the FCA approach it the same way, which is if they turn up on your doorstep, first day live, if you've got nothing and you can prove nothing and you can show you've done nothing in the intervening period, the year, it's going to be you're going to be in a lot of trouble. But if you can show that to the best of your ability, and there's a robust response to that, if you've got senior people responsible, accountable, you've got teams in place, you've got clear processes and procedures. Better yet, if you've got your first, second, third line of your audit process, so quality and control teams all the way through to your external auditors potentially, you can show all of that stuff, and it still doesn't meet the standard. I think that's more where you're likely to see clarification, documentation, and joint efforts, collaborative efforts to try and continue to build this, because I don't think the FCA fundamentally want to come out and just chuck fines around, right? What they want to do is protect the consumer, exactly as they've titled it, and that clarity. There's always a level of interpretation, so if you show you how to go with it.
Even in the very cursory look that I had, I don't think you can look at what the principles are or the reasoning behind it and go, oh, I disagree with this, because it's about, as you said, raising the standards, recognizing that even with TCF, and let's be honest, the vast majority of companies are absolutely doing their best. It's the same as you mentioned. People come to work to want to do a good job. Same with companies, right? Companies want to do well. It's the nature of a competitive market as well. But this kind of raising of the bar has to be a good thing. And actually, as you've been speaking, even with trying to take my QA hat off just briefly, it feels like a great opportunity. It feels like a great opportunity to galvanize around something and say, this can be our vehicle to get actually a lot of other things done as well. Another load of improvements in place. Putting my QA hat back on, because it's always been come on, let's be honest, it's always been a frustration of ours, hasn't it? There's still a lot of the industry that you think you have got such an underutilized superpower right now that if you focused on, and yeah, you've got some external help, BPA, you could really, really make a difference in a whole range of things that you don't currently see because you think in a very narrow way about what QA is for.
It's almost like you're talking about the QA sphere of influence, Martin. Would I be right in that assumption?
I think that's track 5 in my
No, absolutely. It's a completely undervalued, underempowered, and under-leveraged resource. I think you're right. It's a superpower sat there with your QA function, definitely.
But again, great opportunity, right? A really great opportunity.
Yeah, in so many different ways. It's like with vulnerability, and I know I keep coming back to vulnerability, but if you do the right thing by your vulnerable customers, you will be by default doing the right thing by all your customers. So taking a bit more time to really understand their needs, meeting them with empathy, that bit of acknowledgement and reassurance, and, flexing, treating them like an individual. Hey, guess what? That's best practice in, good customer service. So I think there's a lot to be said. You can extrapolate that to the wider duty, really.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, picking up on that one, and your point there, MT, about the difficulty almost in a company rejecting the delivery, the change requirement of this. That overarching principle, consumer duty, is just behave. As organizations behave in a way that your customers aren't complaining about you so much, that your CX metrics are going up, that there's less churn, that there's better value for money. Behave as a business, being more ethically, positively conscious, and apply that to your employees as well, because we're all going through it, right? So understanding how you support everyone just a bit more doesn't have to be, there's just an abyss that you pour money into as a business. There's a great opportunity to actually re-engineer your processes to be more effective, to use the tech to support the need as well as the QA team. Because I think one of the key things that analytics has done is almost in this comet fashion, it's dragged a lot of other stuff with it. And in that is that big data driver, right? Building large language models with AI, great, real cutting edge stuff, right? Unless, we get Terminator and it destroys the world, in which case problematic. But before we reach that kind of point, we've also got loads of tech that's been out there for a long time that does sentiment analysis, that does give you the opportunity to look at every single interaction that you have with your customers and understand, well, what are they talking about? Where's the pain points? Are there any threat words in there where they talk about, this doesn't seem good value for money, or, it's taking ages, and why do I want to pay that fee? There's ample opportunity to combine the tech with your QA expertise to give you a really solid rounded view of how is your business behaving? How are they presenting themselves, yourselves, your business to your consumers? Do you think it's good enough? It's difficult to shy away from the blush test on this kind of thing, because it's more clear than ever that, the FCA has made it more clear than ever that you just have to be better.
Behave, do better.
Now, I imagine that there's been people reassured by this, but also equally intrigued, maybe needing that kind of second look to say, well, where are we? What can we do? You guys have produced a guide for this, right? The Consumer Duty Guide. Where can people get hold of it?
So great. So it's called Helping You to Prepare for Success with the Consumer Duty.
Nice.
And it's because what we don't want to do, hands up honestly, is going, look, there's one right way of going about this. Much in line with the principles, it's about understanding the skills and the knowledge, the confidence for your teams, for your support functions, to really get a grip of the consumer duty. And you can get hold of it. It'll be on our website, on our LinkedIn page. as always, you can get in touch if you want a good natter about this stuff with me or Helen or anyone else in BPA Quality. Yeah, it's we do just want a prescriptive list of things to do, much the same way as the principles about the behaviors. It's very much around talking about what we see as that kind of paradigm shift requirement. You need to change your culture. You need to change how you approach it as a business, and you need to put the support mechanisms in place so everyone that represents your business is in the best possible position to kind of maximize those outcomes, and that's very much what it's like.
Yeah, and just on that, I mean, it feels almost prescriptive to limit it to financial services organizations, really, because like we've kind of uncovered during our conversation today, these principles kind of are, just the fundamentals of good customer experience, customer service, customer support, all aspects of that. So there are definite, I would say, best practice learnings and best practice steer to be had for the wider industry. And as we see with all kinds of things like provision of care for vulnerable customers and the guidance around that, other industries do borrow quite heavily from financial services because it's so potentially so heavily regulated, and there are pounds and pence implications to not being compliant. Then there's a lot to be learned. And how lovely to have the luxury of deciding to adopt things without being held to account by the regulator. It's perfect.
I think we've all seen firsthand many, many times the benefits of sharing best practice, cross-pollination from different industries, whether that is born out of the regulations that people have to apply, comply to, or just through, this really works in the travel industry. You could apply it to housing.
Yeah.
And it's a way of finding new ideas outside of the usual watering hole that you can go and speak to other people and find a different way of doing things that can be applied to your company, your customers, your employees, and give you real, quantum leaps in performance.
You're giving away our trade secrets here.
Sorry. Well, look, I know, and I'm absolutely, I was going to say I'm not objective, but I think the testament to the sheer amount of conversation, work, results that I've seen from you two, from everyone else back in the lovely unicorn world of BPA Quality, that there's no one better for just going to speak to you and saying, here's where we're at. What do you think? And you're lovely, lovely people with giant, giant brains. So why wouldn't you go and speak to Pete or Helen, not just on this topic, but I think on a whole range of topics, because, quality does underpin most of what we do in our industry, but it's not all people that have kind of realized that yet. That was just a bit
succinctly. Thank you.
Well, it's been lovely to see your lovely faces again. It's reminded me of why I enjoyed working at BPA, why I worked at BPA longer than anywhere else. But Helen and Pete, thank you so much. And for, just as a reminder, what was the guide called, Pete? Your guide? I thought it was just a guide to consumer duty, but you got a far nicer
I thought you said, what was the guy called? I'm like, what guy? It's called Helping You to Prepare for Success with the Consumer Duty. All right. But yeah, not prescriptive, best practice based on our over 30 years of base specialism or expertise, and marrying tech and people, the art and the science, as you like to call it, that's it. It's a distillation of just some of the biggest hitters in that space. We've got plenty more. So yeah, if you want to get in touch and have a chat, please do.
Even just use the guide to make an excuse to get in touch with Pete and Helen, because time spent with them is just lovely. Try and get them in a bar as well. That makes it even better. Thank you both.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, MT. Thanks.
Love you both.
Love you too.